Buckle up for a new episode of You and the Law Podcast, the one and only law enforcement podcast that's tackling critical policing and social justice issues and provides insights into the daily realities of policing with your host, Chief Virgil Green.
Controversy now surrounding this investigation into an ICE agent shooting and the death of Renee Good yesterday.
Leaders at Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension say the FBI cut them out of this investigation. Fox 9's Corin Hoggart is live at BCA headquarters for us tonight. And Corin, is the lone approach by the feds unusual, first and foremost, and what does it change moving forward with this case?
Yeah, Renee and Kelsey, the FBI will typically be the lead investigator in any shooting that involves a federal officer. But what state leaders say is unusual is for the FBI to prevent state agencies from accessing their investigative materials. And this could all have some pretty serious implications in legal acts down the road.
Minnesota must be part of this investigation.
Minnesota is not part of the investigation into Renee Good's death at the hands of an ICE agent. Public Safety Commissioner Bob Jacobson says it's normal for the FBI to take the lead when a federal officer is involved in a shooting, but the Bureau typically gives access to state agencies. In this case, the BCA says it's completely cut out, and Jacobson says they'd now struggle to investigate on their own.
It would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, without cooperation from the federal government.
The Trump administration has defended the shooting and painted Good as a domestic terrorist. Vice President J.D. Vance dismissed the possibility of prosecution, saying the agent is a federal officer who was doing federal law enforcement.
That guy's protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job. The idea that Tim Walz and a bunch of radicals in Minneapolis are going to go after and make this guy's life miserable because he was doing the job that he was asked to do is preposterous.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty have both indicated they'd consider filing state charges, and they're exploring how to investigate without FBI cooperation. But a former federal prosecutor says even if they filed a case in state court, federal law says the case could be moved to federal courts. Prosecutors there could dismiss it unless the state proved the agent's actions were outside his official duties or were objectively unreasonable or clearly unlawful. But he says the final decision should be a judge's.
The FBI may make a determination this person was acting within the course of their employment and not allow any prosecution and try to remove it. But then again, it's got to be the judicial branch who makes that decision, not the executive branch.
Governor Walz wants the BCA back in, but he also had a request related to the whole ICE surge in Minnesota.
Just give us a pause. Let us breathe. Look, we're exhausted. We're exhausted as Minnesotans. We're exhausted as Americans. And this relentless assault on Minnesota, for whatever reason, is just cruel now.
State leaders say that they have not jumped to any legal conclusions about what should happen here in this case, but they do say that, the FBI blocking them prevents them from really knowing what happened in this case, and that prevents them from maybe doing their jobs. And what they say is that they need to do their jobs. They need to be back into this investigation. Live in St. Paul, Corin Hoggart, Fox 9.
I want to thank you for tuning in for a special episode of You and the Law Podcast. We normally air live on Thursday afternoon, but tonight we're airing live. I've got a guest who's going to be joining me on the podcast. Is former Ferguson, Missouri Police Chief Janson Armstrong, and we're going to be unpacking what's happened almost a week ago up here in the Minneapolis area. So let me bring on my guest, Chief Armstrong. Chief, hey, thank you for joining You and the Law Podcast.
Chief, thanks for having me.
Man, I know you've been a busy man. I said that to you earlier. I know this past weekend you were on several national news outlets talking about what's happened up here in Minneapolis. And, I wanted to bring you on because, you bring a lens of being a police chief. You've experienced what Chief O'Hara has experienced up in Minneapolis, and just your knowledge and expertise is going to be valuable to the conversation tonight as we talk about, the rift that this is going to cause between local, state, and now with the Justice Department on this investigation. And so, Chief, everybody can have their opinions about it. And I think everything that I've heard, and you probably have heard the same thing, is that let this investigation take its course, and then we can have a little bit more information, add some more context to what has happened. So again, thank you for joining us, and let our listeners know about who you are and what you're doing now.
Yeah, thanks, Virgil. So for those that don't know me, Janson Armstrong, retired police chief. My last police chief position was in Apex, North Carolina, which is in the Raleigh metropolitan area. Before coming to Apex, I was the chief in Ferguson, Missouri for a couple of years. And I had the pleasure of leading that department while under a federal consent decree, and just really trying to do the work in the community to make the reforms and make the changes that the community wanted to see, and that was spelled out by our agreement with the Department of Justice and the things that were mandated on our department. Being the chief in Ferguson, I was there when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, which set off another round of riots and civil unrest in Ferguson at the time. And so had to deal a lot with just navigating crisis on a regular basis and everything that went into that. Started my career in Georgia, in Forest Park, Georgia, which is in the Atlanta metropolitan area. Made my way up through the ranks of that department, ultimately becoming the interim police chief of that organization. So I've been a police chief 3 times in 3 departments in 3 states. And that really, I think, gave me a unique lens of when I look at things, just being in different places and some of the challenges that are unique in the different places. So since retiring, I wrote a book. I'm done here. Put that book out, and now I do professional speaking around the country and a lot of consulting work. A lot of work in reform and policing practices and policies and things like that.
Well, Jason, like I said, you definitely bring a unique perspective, a lens to the conversation we're going to be having tonight about the thin blue rift in Minneapolis. And I think you've been the police chief in 3 different states. I came from Oklahoma to Arkansas, now in Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Twin Cities areas. And so you get into these positions not expecting to have to deal with some crises, and nobody tells you that when they offer you the position.
Well, and that's the thing. I tell everybody that, when I'm doing coaching with individuals that are interested in becoming a police chief, one of the first things that I always tell them, if you're not ready to have a national crisis on day 1 of you sitting in the chief seat, then you're not ready to be a police chief.
Yeah.
Because in the world that we live in, like, we don't control any of this stuff. You have no idea when the next crisis is going to be in front of you. It could be tomorrow. It could be a year from now. For some people that are lucky enough, it never comes. And that's something that, we always have to keep top of mind and be thinking about, how you would navigate and manage, any situation that could be as critical as what we're seeing up in Minneapolis right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jason, I want to remind those, if you're just now tuning into the podcast tonight, our topic is the thin blue rift in Minneapolis, and I've got on Chief Janson Armstrong, retired from last agent, as he mentioned, Apex, but former chief from Ferguson, and the author. Now you're an author, man. I mean, not too many of us who are in this profession can say we're an author, but I think we all have a story to tell. So it's good. So I want to get to something real quick before we jump into it. What when you come out with the book, I'm Done Here, what kind of inspired you and led you to write this book?
People have been asking me for years when I was going to put a book out, largely built off of my time in Ferguson and that just being such a pivotal, location and in the history of policing, such a pivotal moment during our time. And so whenever I would speak to different groups or, give a keynote speech somewhere, a lot of people would ask me when my book was going to come out, because clearly I had a very interesting and unique career, and I had a lot of things to talk about and to share. And that just built up over time. And when I started thinking about, retiring and transitioning over into the consulting and the speaking world, one of the things that I knew, could help me make that transition was if I documented my experiences in a book.
Yeah.
And so when I made the decision that I was going to retire in 2024, in January of 24 is when I started getting serious about working on the book and started getting, putting it in motion, if you will, and found a publisher to work with that really helped me, understand how books need to be crafted and sharing my message, what was a beneficial way that I could share it with readers.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, we're both members of Noble, and it's always good to get a Noble brother on the podcast. And Noble, I've been a member of Noble probably over 25 years, and it is a great organization to be a part of. And just with the networking and the people that you meet is so important. And so, I think the first time I ran into you was at the ICP conference in Dallas back in, I want to say, was that 23?
Man,
yeah, I think it was 23. I think it was the first conference after the whole deal with COVID, and so that's kind of where we first ran into each other at. So,
okay.
But Jason, with so much in the news about what's going on between ICE and Minneapolis Police Department and what's going on with the BCA, I wanted to have this conversation about this rift, and you can clearly see that there is a rift that we normally have never seen before. I think this is not something that we even saw back with George Floyd or with any other high-profile situation between the local police. Everybody gets in front of the cameras, as you know, and everybody puts on a good show and say, hey, we got our federal partners here, and everybody is talking a good game, but behind the scenes there's some conflicts, but now is playing out in real time. And so wanted to kind of get your perspective on what you've seen, because this is something that is going to continue over the days, weeks, and months and years. Probably is going to impact how these agencies are able to rebuild some trust with each other, but more importantly, Chief, how the public is looking at this.
Yeah, and that's the key, is the public and the community. What I see from a lot of the press conferences and things that are taking place is a lot of politics at play, and a lot of political jockeying, whether at the federal level, at the state level, or what have you. And what my hope and desire would be for the law enforcement community up there and the law enforcement professionals, regardless of what level you're at, is still a commitment to the people of the community, and being able to work together in spaces that is going to be beneficial to provide in that community safety, that public safety, and things that they're charged with. You mentioned some of the previous incidents, up in that area, Philando Castile, George Floyd, Dante Wright.
Dante Wright, yeah.
But in all of those cases, it was local law enforcement that was involved in the critical incident, and the feds may have come in to run a parallel or a joint investigation on it. So the officer was a local member of law enforcement, and it was the feds maybe coming in to look at it. The Department of Justice, we regularly see that come in. Where this one, the roles are reversed, where it's a federal agent that was involved in the critical incident, and now you have the state level wanting to do that investigation and be a part of it. And I'm not aware of a history of that in Minnesota and Minneapolis. What's unique is I've had a similar experience here in North Carolina. Whenever a municipal officer is involved in a shooting, we have a state agency, the State Bureau of Investigation, the SBI. Mm-hmm. They're always called in to investigate that shooting, so we're not investigating our own shooting.
Yeah.
couple of years ago in my jurisdiction in Apex, I had an SBI agent get into an officer involved shooting. And so I'm on the phone with the district attorney and the director of the SBI, and we're trying to sort through all of this very quickly before, the investigation gets started of making those decisions and understanding like who's going to handle what. And in that case, the district attorney wanted my department to handle it because it wasn't one of my officers that was involved in the shooting. And that was one of the first times that, any of us were aware of where you had a local agency that was doing the investigation of a state agent, because the agency that normally handled it was the agency that was involved in the shooting. And so sometimes, you're put in these unique situations where you really haven't seen or experienced this before. And that's where you're really, relying on your relationships with individuals from the professional lens to do things that, to the point that you made earlier, hopefully not only will be the best investigation that can be done and the most critical, unbiased look through everything that happened with that incident. At the same time, something that the community can have the confidence and trust in that it's being handled and it's being done, the right way.
Yeah. So, as you just brought up what took place in Apex, obviously that relationship that you all had on a state and the local and state level, was there anything that you were concerned about or anybody else kind of concerned about when that decision was made that your agency would lead the investigation?
There wasn't anything that I was concerned about. I can't speak for the others in that process. But when the district attorney, asked me, did I have the confidence in my department that we could do the investigation? My answer was 100% yes, because I know how qualified my folks were.
Yeah.
And I knew that they were going to do their jobs and they were going to do it the right way, because that's what I saw from them day in and day out.
Yeah.
And so I had all the confidence in the world that they would do it appropriately. And they did. They did a great job with that investigation. And so, for me, I didn't have any concerns or any challenges with it. Like anything else, we handle what's in front of us. And we give it 100% of what we have to give, and we're always going to be professional in how we do that, and treat everybody, with the same level of professionalism and fairness.
Yeah, well, Chief, and I think one of the things that immediately within, I'm gonna say, hours after the shooting up here, which took place last Wednesday, was the rush to say that the deceased was this was a terrorist attack, and the rhetoric behind that, and it was quickly, it seemed like very quickly there was a narrative that was being put out by ICE and the Secretary of
Homeland
Security, yeah, and that. And so it seems like that's what kind of, now all of a sudden, hey, the BCA is jointly going to be involved in this investigation. And then all of a sudden that quickly changed and the narrative changed. And now you've got a state agency, which is, everybody is known that they're able to lead a parallel investigation. But all of a sudden now they're saying, no, there's not going to be any kind of state involvement. And I think that's kind of that's been the biggest issue, that they're basically saying you don't need to, there's no information that you really need to be a part of this investigation. And I think that is a lot for the mayor to accept, the police chief to accept, and the governor to accept, and even the county prosecutor to say that, even the attorney general, Keith Ellison, to say, this is a federal investigation. And everything that I've heard, Chief, is not what they want to take over the investigation. They just want to have a seat at the table, just in case there are potentially some state charges that could be brought against this ICE agent.
Yeah, and that's the challenge when politics are so heavily involved in things, because before this incident happened, there was a lot of political back and forth between the administration and the leadership in Minnesota. And some people, would probably even argue that's the reason that ICE is there to begin with, is because of that political rift between Governor Walz and also with the mayor of Minneapolis, and some of the comments and the commentary and some of the things that we hear come from the federal administration on things. And so, I'm not overly surprised to see some of the decisions that have been made in the decision to not have the state of Minnesota having access to what the FBI investigation, what they're doing or how they're handling that, because there's already a political rift between the leadership in Minnesota and DC. And like I said, I think that's unfortunate, because for people in the community, there are different laws that apply federally versus what is applied at the state level. That's often one of the major frustrations that people have, when we see things happen and we're trying to explain these things, and we see different outcomes and the like, is because things are very different from state to state.
Yeah.
And in some of these cases, you may see someone go through something through the state system, and whatever that outcome is could be very different than that individual going through the federal system for the same thing, and you have a totally different outcome. And so there are differences there, and largely that's why I feel the leadership in Minnesota wanted to have their state agency there and looking at the investigation and doing it parallel with what the FBI is doing, and having access to whatever evidence and information that they were looking at, so they could apply that to the laws of Minnesota to see, if there was anything there that they would potentially, move forward with, because there is a difference in what committing crimes at the state level looks like compared to committing crimes at the federal level. But with all the political jockeying that's going on in the back and forth, even before this happened, I'm not surprised to see that decision made by the feds and them, looking at, or being able to make the argument that they don't feel comfortable having Minnesota, at the table in this because of X, Y, and Z, which to me it's sad that it has the feeling that just the political wins are what's driving the decisions, and not, what's in the best interest for everyone that's involved in this tragedy.
Yeah, you're right, Chief. And I think, you made mention that this was a problem before last Wednesday. This goes back to, what took place in the presidential election. Walz was the vice president, running mate. And there's been so many attacks from this administration on Governor Walz, the Attorney General. I know Keith Ellison real well, and he has had so many lawsuits against the Trump administration. So there's not been a good relationship with the state of Minnesota and the feds ever since this administration has came into office. And this just really, what happened last Wednesday, just added to that. And, we've all seen the video. It's very disturbing. There's a lot of questions about what happened. And there's a narrative around it. But, as you mentioned before we came on the podcast, there was a life that was lost. And this life had a meaning and had a purpose. And this life had kids. And, people can get in front of a camera and say, their sympathies, but is there really any sincerity to that, especially when, people can agree or disagree, Chief, on, hey, she shouldn't have had a car parked the way it was. She was interfering. But at the end of the day, she has 3 kids, and they're not, their mother is gone. And so where's the human side of this tragedy? And because that's being missed throughout the past week.
Yeah, and I don't think it's being missed. I just think it's being pushed to the side.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Who's talking and what it is that they're talking about, and how these things are being highlighted. And, for me, and, I'm sure you've seen, I've done a lot of media interviews, since this happened, whether on CNN or ABC.
Yeah.
And that's always a focal point of mine in trying to bring the humanity, to this tragedy, that, regardless of what happened, regardless of how things unfolded, regardless of how, an individual may look at this and what side of it they may land on, a life at the end of it, lives are impacted.
Yeah.
The Agent Ross, his life is forever impacted by this. Miss Good and her family and her loved ones, like, they are forever impacted by this. And, that's the unfortunate, side of something happening so tragic at the same time, so polarizing and so divisive.
Yeah.
Just where we are as a country, that I think, some people are at times, we get so caught up in making the argument for what side of this we land on, that we just kind of brush to the side the more long-term implications of how we're all impacted, by these things, and that we continue to see, and just the trauma that this brings to communities. And I mean, you just have so many people that's arguing and fighting with one another right now, where, like I said, at the end of the day, a life was lost, and it was lost tragically. And that's something that we can't be dismissive of.
Yeah. Well, and it was lost. It was lost not on live TV, but it was being recorded in real time. And you had, a lot of cell phone video footage that was quickly put out on social media. News outlets picked it up. So there was a lot of people who almost really witnessed in real time what took place with Mrs. Good. And the fact that, she had kids, her kids probably saw what happened. Friends saw what happened. Neighbors saw what happened. And like I said, it's just being, and then the personal attacks on her and her wife. Again, a life was taken. People can, in our profession, in the law enforcement community, can say, well, she put herself in that position. But at the same time, let's talk about what took place. Even when George Floyd, what took place with him, you saw how quickly people came out to attack George Floyd. And the fact that even before they really knew anything about George Floyd, it was George Floyd's fault. It was his fault as to why his life was taken. But ultimately, we all saw the video of that. And so, again, it's just tragic all the way around, Chief. And this community has not, and I said this to you before we came on the podcast, has not really healed. There's still a lot of healing going on between Minneapolis, what happened with George Floyd. Dante Wright happened in a suburb city outside of Minneapolis, a suburb, not too far from where the city where I was at. But George Floyd gets more, there's more conversation around what happened with George Floyd than it is with what happened with Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. But still, it's two communities are still trying to heal from a tragic loss of life that involved law enforcement.
Yeah. And, with George Floyd's incident, that was, clearly, one of the most polarizing things because of that video and how fast that video got out there. And for a lot of people in our profession, a lot of what I heard at the time from people in the community was that was the first time that they heard law enforcement leaders, speak up and speak out about something and call something, yes, that was there, and that should not have happened and things. And, people, I had a lot of conversations during that time. And a lot of people was just trying to understand, like, all right, well, why are y'all doing, y'all are only doing this now because you all are worried about X, Y, and Z, where y'all don't do these in some of these other situations. And one of the things that I had to explain to people is, in this profession, like, we understand that there is a lot that goes into an investigation, especially of a critical incident, a shooting, or where somebody loses their life or whatnot. And for all of the things that get put out publicly, and we see videos popping up online and stuff, there's often more videos, more evidence that the public never sees.
Yes.
But it be a part of our investigation and things like that. With the George Floyd incident, that video really showed us everything.
It did.
Because he was in handcuffs on the ground, 4 officers around. Like, there was nothing that he could do. That wasn't one of these split-second decisions that had to be made, where us in law enforcement, we know we need to wait for all of the facts and all of the evidence to come out before we could make a professional decision or ruling, or really offer up some insights into it. Where you take the Dante Wright incident, you hear the officer, you hear her yelling, taser, 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 and then she pulls out her gun and she fires the shot with a gun.
Yeah.
Once again, that's that's something that's in the heat of the moment. That's a quick decision that is being made. The same with this incident right here with Agent Ross, and the vehicle starts moving, and he makes a quick reaction and decision, and decides to fire his weapon. Like, those are things that happen very fast, and they really need to be dissected to make a professional or a legal ruling, for those that are going to be looking at it from the legal lens, that have to make those decisions, as opposed to what happened with George Floyd. The man is down on the ground in handcuffs, like, he is no threat to anybody. There were 1,000 other things that they could have done to keep him under control, instead of having to sit there for 9+ minutes, knee in the man's neck, while he's hollering and screaming that he can't breathe, and all of those things. And it's agonizing to see those things. And you're right, with all of the videos and how this is out of circulation, clearly, it is more than likely, that her loved ones, her family, her kids, have seen some of the video footage that is out there. And, your heart has to go out to them. I had a case a couple years ago where we had a double homicide, and there was a 911 call that I had to turn over to the media because of the open record laws. But I did not want them to play that recording, because it would have been very traumatic for the family and for the community to hear.
Yeah.
And I asked our media partners, because there were other calls that I was sending to them.
Yeah.
They could. And so I had to send it to them because the law required me to send it to them. But also, we were begging them, like, don't use this to do your stories. There are other calls that you can use. This is going to be too damaging to the family, to the loved ones, and to the community. And I was lucky enough in that case that I had good enough working relationships with our media partners where they didn't air that call. We don't always have the luxury of being able to brace people for the impact of what it is that they're going to see in this age of social media. And that's another sad thing is now, more people, their first option is to let me pull out my phone and start recording, thinking about help somebody.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And that happened, last Wednesday. You had some people, go live streaming. And, one person I've seen a video where he was respectful and made the comment that, that's somebody's loved one in that vehicle. And but he did not show, because he was right there. It happened right in front of his house. So he could have clearly had from his vantage point, could have zoomed in and could have captured, some things that were very traumatic to him and to others who was watching his live stream, but he didn't. And so, I think some people really need to just kind of think about that and not think about the clicks they're going to get or how many views they're going to get on YouTube or whatever other social media platform, and try to make something off of it. So that's a whole nother podcast to talk about when people want to, financially gain from a tragic incident.
examples we see where somebody is literally, on the ground suffering, and things, and our automatic response to that is, let me pull out my phone and record this individual suffering and maybe even dying, as opposed to trying to call for help on your phone and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and you were not in Ferguson when Michael Brown happened, but I know you saw all the videos just like what we saw. And I think, even then in cell phone, people recorded that incident. And I think that kind of inflamed some of the things that took place there in Ferguson. But I want to, touch on something, Jason, something that you see a lot on LinkedIn as well as I do. Everybody talks about leadership. And where's the leadership, in your opinion? Where's the leadership in this situation? Because at the end of the day, this is about, forget what political party you're with. The politics should stay out of it, just as you mentioned. But where's the leadership at? And where are the leaders that should step in and say, this isn't the way we practice. This isn't the way we do business, because this is going to have a long interim impact. Even when this administration is out of office, there's still going to be a rift there. So can you kind of speak on your opinion of the leadership in law enforcement and what's not being said that should probably be said?
So I don't know if I would assign that one to law enforcement leadership. Like when I hear the question, what is leadership doing? Man, leadership is talking at the federal level, because the law enforcement leaders are not the ones that are in charge of leading these efforts. And so it starts at the White House. Yeah. And, we've seen the social media comments that came out immediately. We see the press conference and the comments by the vice president, and then the head of Homeland Security. So they came out talking very, very quickly, and what their stance was on this. And so for me, that is them establishing their leadership in this space of how they view it and what their stance is on it. It's not like the director of the FBI is going to come out and is going to say something contrary to that. Yeah. Because that, those are the individuals that he reports to. Yeah. And so, that's what makes this situation so unique, is unfortunately, like, it really has become a political stronghold, if you will, on what this looks like and how it will play out. And you have the political leadership in the state of Minnesota that is trying to advocate for getting access and being able to do things. And I saw some comments from some of the leadership in Minnesota where they were asking, people that had additional video footage that maybe hadn't been put out publicly yet, to send that stuff to them so they could look at everything that was just publicly out there, since they don't have access, to the investigation that the FBI is doing. And so being in a position like this where, we have the videos that are out there, and we can look and analyze those, and we can, draw some thoughts from that, but it does not tell us everything. I did an interview, I don't know, maybe Thursday of last week. And one of my biggest questions that I had about this incident and how it unfolded is I was curious, because I hadn't seen at that point, if there was any video footage to show where Miss Good was looking, or like what direction she was facing when the vehicle went into motion, because up to that point we had not seen any video footage on it. And so with the agents that was trying to open her car door, one of the main questions I had was she looking to the left at that agent that was trying to open her door, or was she looking forward because she was about to drive off or put the vehicle in motion? And I didn't have the answer to that question. And like, those are all things that, are important to have in dissecting an incident, in trying to understand like what happened and trying to piece it together. Because, in the criminal world, and when we talk about criminal offenses, it all comes down to intent. And that's what has to be proved in a court of law with someone's intent to do X, Y, and Z, or how reckless somebody was in something. But then when the video footage came out that is apparently from Agent Ross's cell phone, he was walking around recording, then, you get a little bit clearer picture, that she was looking forward, when the vehicle was moving or was starting to get in motion and things. And so we can dissect what's out there, but we also know and understand that there could be more things that are out there that we haven't seen. And as law enforcement, we get called and we get asked a lot of questions to chime in and weigh in on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. We could talk about what we've seen and what we've analyzed up to the point, but there's still some things that could be out there that could significantly impact. And then also just the understanding that every state has different laws. I've never worked in Minnesota. Yeah. And so, I'm not overly familiar with the statutes and the laws in Minnesota to be able to say that, from what I see, it should be this way or that way. I leave that, to the people in Minnesota that have that knowledge and expertise.
Yeah. Well, hey, Chief, I just want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast that tonight's topic is the thin blue rift in Minneapolis surrounding the tragic shooting that took place last Wednesday with Mrs. Good, with the ICE officer. If you got any questions or comments, put them in the chat. We'll definitely get through those throughout the podcast. But Chief, you mentioned, just the interviews that you've done, and I know there's been a lot of questions have been thrown at you, and people probably are expecting you to, your opinions. It definitely, what you dealt with in Ferguson. And just your analysis of what you're seeing here in Minneapolis. And, one of the things we talked about was there was a rift already before last Wednesday. And it was a big rift, especially after this whole fraud investigation of over $9 billion, and just the attacks on, the senator from Minnesota, and others, the governor, and that just kind of heightened what was going on. And being up here in the area where you see a lot of stuff day to day, and a lot of the videos that I've seen, Chief, has been disturbing because you're not really going after the bad actors. You're showing up at schools. And one of the things that really disturbed me, and I like to say this, because after the shooting last Wednesday, there was a high school not too far from where this took place. And I don't know if you've heard this. I want to say it was Roosevelt High School, where ICE agents showed up as that school was letting out. Now, here's an incident where a lady's life has been taken, and here you are at a school getting into a confrontation with the principals and other staff at the school. And I think that just really concerned a lot of people, because it's like, okay, where's the human side of even the ICE agents? Whether you're a part of the community or you're not part of the community, why would you show up at a school, at a high school, blocks away? And then what are you doing there? Because it's not like you're there to pick up somebody who's got a warrant for, being in the country illegal, or, they committed, some violent crime. So that's been the most disturbing thing that I've seen, is that they're going into some communities that there's a lot of questions as to why and what's behind it.
Yeah. And, we've seen a lot of videos, with tactics that, I find are unprofessional, uncalled for, and really is rolling back a lot of the work that law enforcement has done over the years in trying to build up some confidence and some trust from members in the community, where we've had some strained relationships. Just over decades. Yeah. And that part, that part is extremely disturbing to see. It's extremely problematic. But it goes back to the question that you asked earlier about leadership. They're doing this because that's what they've been instructed to do. Yeah. Those are the marching orders that they've been given. And, I had a conversation with someone not long ago where their take on it was, well, the agents that are out there, they should just quit their jobs. And they shouldn't go do any of this stuff, and they should know that it's wrong and stuff. And I understand, how people have, that take on things. But it's not, it's not that easy and simple. And one of the things that we've seen is, with this administration, if you don't play by,
play by the book,
play by their rules and their guidance, then there are some consequences that are attached to that.
Yeah.
And one thing that, I always try to highlight and educate community members on is dereliction of duty. Because that is a very real thing. And when you take an oath of office, when you are a sworn law enforcement official, you take an oath of office, and if you get an order to do something and you refuse to do it, in some situations, you could be committing a crime, because that will be consistent with being a dereliction of duty, and you could face some penalties and things as a result of it. And so, it's not as easy when you are a sworn law enforcement officer to just say, well, I'm not going to do this, or I'm only going to do this or do that, or different things like that, because there could be some additional consequences that you're faced with. And this is, I've never worked for the federal government. And so I do not pretend to know all the ins and outs of how, the federal system works.
Yeah.
I have to believe that for all of these things to be playing out for as long as they've been playing out in the cities that they have deployed federal agents, I have to believe that there has been, a review and a high level scrutinized review of what's being done and the legalities of it. And so for the fact that it is still happening, as somebody who is not familiar with that system and the processes, I have to believe that there is something legally that is allowing them to go into these spaces and to carry out the actions that they're carrying out, or at least it's still in litigation for that decision to be made, and they're allowed to do it while it's under review. And if that is the case, then the agents that are going out there and doing these things, that's what it is. But I want to make a point though. We see a lot of videos of the bad things that are happening and what's unprofessional and the racial profiling that we're seeing, just rolling up to people in the parking lot. Hey, were you born here, and all these other things where they have nothing else to go off of.
Yeah.
In the same vein, all right, I've seen some videos where you have federal agents that aren't acting like that.
Yeah.
They are treating people with some human decency, and they are being, professional in how they go about doing the assignment that they've been tasked to do. And I also want to be mindful of that also, and not be dismissive of that. It's not everybody that works for ICE or whatever, Border Patrol or whatnot, are doing, the bad things and the unprofessional things that we're seeing in some of these videos. And I don't want to, paint all of them with that broad brush, because we know, how complicated that is, and how challenging it is at times.
Yeah. And I think, thanks for bringing it up, because again, I don't want, people to listen to this and say, oh, you guys were attacking ICE. We're not attacking ICE. There are obviously some people out there that have committed crimes that ICE, they are aware of where they're living, and they have a job to go and to take that person into custody. So yeah, you're right. And again, thanks for bringing that up. But one of the things, I want to, touch on, Chief, is, when you look at the video, and I saw your interview with ABC this on Sunday, I think the question was asked about, our training that we get in especially in municipal and even on the feds, because I've seen their policy. You never put yourself in front of a car. I think that is one of the most dangerous things that you can do. Can you kind of speak on that a little bit? Again, every situation is different, but at the same time, when you've got the opportunity to remove yourself in front of a vehicle, I think that's the most smartest thing to do.
Yeah, and this situation, that part of it is very unique. So, of course, if you are already dealing with a tense environment and the situation is elevated, where you feel as though somebody may be a flight risk, we know not to put ourselves in front of a vehicle. In this situation, Agent Ross, he had already made a loop around the vehicles. He had already walked in front of this vehicle. He walks by her driver window, and they have an exchange.
Yeah.
And so, in looking at that, there was nothing present at that moment that he's walking around and having that interaction with her that signaled, that this was going to, escalate. Into, her vehicle driving off or anything, like that. And so that part of the encounter didn't happen until he comes back around and the other agent is at the door, and we see that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. And so when we look at, law enforcement policies, and when I think about, the policies that I had at the agencies, that I led, yes, we always, try to look at and learn from previous things that had happened that, really led to tragedies.
Yeah.
How can we put things in place to extremely minimize? We can never accomplish 100% on anything. And so we cannot say that in doing this will 100% guarantee that this will never happen again. But we can be very strategic in looking and dissecting at things and then trying to see how we can put policies and practices in place that will significantly minimize the potential for bad things to happen on the other side of it. And with this encounter, there, from what we can see on the video, so I don't know what happened and how she even got to that place and that position and where her vehicle was and all those things. I haven't seen anything that provides that information. But when Agent Ross drove behind her vehicle and stopped, and he got out with his phone to walk around and record her vehicle, clearly that there hadn't been anything up to that point where he felt as though that the vehicle, was a danger.
A danger, yeah.
And so, all of that just happened in that split second moment when she made the decision to put the vehicle and drive and start driving off when he was at the corner.
Yeah. Well, you've seen a lot of videos, just like I've seen a lot of videos. And I think, when I listened to the press conference from the Homeland Security Secretary the day that this happened, and she was called, the deceased, a terrorist, and she kind of gave a reason why, the agents were there, that the car had got stuck in the snow and they were trying to push the car out the snow. And, Jason, I'm just going to have to keep it real, man. I think when I sit there, that's a pretty big size SUV. It was not that much snow on the ground up here. And I didn't see, I didn't see anything before that. But, there were vehicles that were parked in the snow that were able to go around and get out. I just kind of thought that was just, you paint this narrative. Hey, they were trying to push the car out the snow. They were being attacked by protesters and so forth. And, again, it just kind of goes back to what we've said earlier. Where's the humanity side of this? And at the end of the day, Jason, we all will have to answer to the man above for what we've done right and what we've done wrong. And I just can't see how people can live with themselves and come up with this in all behind politics. Because at the end of the day, I think we're all smart to look at something and say, kind of BS. I mean, if they were really trying to push the car, here's a Tahoe or whatever, I think it was, that car could have driven out the snow. It wasn't stuck. That's just one of the things that kind of has caught my attention as I listened to her say.
You know, man, I don't know. You know, they said that the vehicle was stuck. You know, I take their word for it, because to me, like that doesn't have any real bearing on the incident that happened.
Exactly.
The number one question that I have for this incident that I have not seen anything come out and I have no answers for is, so in watching the video, you see at least 3 vehicles that have been reported to be, you know, federal agent vehicles drive past her vehicle.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see Agent Ross drive behind her vehicle in his Tahoe. Then you see a Ford Explorer drive in front of her vehicle, and I believe it was another, maybe a white Tahoe or something. So I see 3 vehicles drive past her vehicle, and so that gives the impression that whatever they had going on, at least some of the agents were leaving. Yeah, as if that they were done with whatever they came there to do. Which I've never heard that part of. You know what they do and whatnot. But then you have the pickup truck drive up, and instead of driving around, the pickup truck stops, and then you have an agent get out the passenger seat and one get out the driver's seat, and the driver of the pickup truck, as he's approaching, that's the one that's yelling, you know, get the F out the car, get out the car. Yeah. And I haven't heard like what was the catalyst for that? Yeah. Like, what was the driver, like, what was the legal justification and the legal authority for what was going on in that moment? Because, you know, Agent Ross, he had already walked around the vehicle. He had been right there at the door, and he did not say anything to Miss Good about, you know, needing to get her out the vehicle or anything like that. Correct. And so what was it from those 2 agents and the driver of the pickup truck in particular, like, what was the objective of that part of getting her out of the vehicle? Like, what were we accomplishing in that? Like, that is, to me, that is the biggest question that is out there that, you know, we don't know the answer to that. And we haven't heard any, at least, you know, I haven't seen anything that addresses that has come out on that. That's what I want to know. I don't care about the vehicle being stuck and all the other stuff that goes into it. Yeah. You know, what was the legal authority and justification for the actions that we were doing in that moment? Because, like, that is what led to everything else happening. Yeah. It was, you know, that approach and, you know, get the F out of the car and pulling on the door handle that you hear Ms. Good's wife yell, you know, drive, baby, drive. Yeah. And she's yelling at her to drive off. Yeah. Because that interaction, you know, started. And, you know, what was there? Because vehicles had already driven past. Yeah. And you know, that's one of the questions that I hope the investigation that's going on, you know, I hope that information gets put out there, because I think that's something that is just important information to have out there of what is the narrative around that and what's the explanation for it. Yeah, well, and you're right. You know, that is that's a key piece of information that's missing. You know, what was you know, was this a traffic stop? You know, were they, you know, again, you mentioned all these vehicles, you know, you saw, you know, gray Explorer goes around the vehicle, actually pulls off and goes around, other ICE vehicle goes around. But, you know, why did this gray pickup pull up, get out the car, approach her, when clearly, you know, as you mentioned, Agent Ross didn't feel threatened at the time, because Mrs. Good basically is having kind of a friendly conversation with him. She's not angry, she's not upset, but they're pretty upset because she's blocked the car, you know, but they were still able to get around her. So again, there's just a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that's why, to go back, that the public is demanding an open and transparent investigation. But I don't, you know, even on a state level, I just don't think people here
are feeling that that's going to happen, to where the public gets the information that the public deserve to know.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough. And when you have, a tragedy like this, and you often have people that have very strong feelings, one way or the other, about what's right, what's wrong, and what the outcome should be, then, regardless of what the outcome is, that is going to be a side of this that is going to feel as though, it wasn't done right, it wasn't handled right, and that there, are some other factors that are having influence or impacting, how this stuff is being done. And that's, that's always the most difficult part in all of this. And that's where, all of the work that has gone into, trying to improve law enforcement policies and practices, and trying to get more creative and more collaborative, with community in this space, to where when you do have a tragedy happen, none of us can see into the future, and must have the power and the ability to prevent necessarily, a critical incident from happening. But at the same time, I want the community to have the confidence in us that if something does happen, that we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to look at it, objectively and fair. And that is the challenge of what is not present with this situation, because of, the relationship and really, the rift between Minnesota government leadership and federal government leadership. And that, I think that's going to have a big impact, and I won't even, I'm not saying that's going to have a big impact on how the investigation is done. I do feel confident that it's going to have a big impact on how people perceive how the investigation was done whenever the final decisions are made in this matter, and depending on, where you fall and things, that's going to be the challenge, because people are not going to have a lot of confidence in the result if it's not the result that they want to see.
Yeah. Well, I want to say this before we, we're coming up on the last few minutes of the podcast, is that when we go back to January 6th, all the people that were pardoned, that were attacking federal agents, Capitol officers, and now it's flipped. And you got that narrative that's out there, Chief, where people are saying, well, look what happened to our federal police officers at the Capitol. You pardon all these here people who were attacking law enforcement, and now here you are saying that this ICE agent has absolutely full immunity from any prosecution. That's kind of a hard pill for a lot of people to accept, because there's already been some decisions made by this administration that that's just the way it's going to go. But when you go back and you look at what happened with the insurrection, that's even with that, I think there was still a lot of people, even in law enforcement, that were just still have not gotten over the fact that a lot of people attacked a lot of Capitol police officers, and they got pardons.
Yeah, and for that to be the first day of the administration, and that is what was so important to be done, is to pardon the real domestic terrorists that our Capitol and what happened that day, and to see all of the thugs and hoodlums get pardoned and get released. That showed me all that I needed to see. About how things were going to be handled and going to be looked at. And so for me, just as an individual and the career that I've had in law enforcement and public safety, and that being the only career that I've ever known. And to see those individuals just get off that way was an extremely hard pill to swallow, because I will never forget the images that I was watching in my office in Ferguson on the TV of what was happening and what was unfolding, and the emotions that I had attached to seeing that happen. and for the individuals that were brought to justice, rightfully so, and held accountable, and with the stroke of a pen, to see all of that,
all that went away
for just about all of them. I haven't gotten over it, and I know a lot of people in our profession, a lot of our colleagues will never get over it. I know I will never get over it.
Yeah.
And so they miss me with all of the the posturing and the commentary about being so supportive of X, Y, and Z. Like, it's all politics, man. And it's a lot of nonsense, a lot of BS. That's for me, that's why I don't get upset by any of the rhetoric that I see come out and put out in some of the things that they say, because I know how I view it and what I feel they're trying to accomplish by all of this stuff, and it's sticking to the script, and making sure that that they stick to the rhetoric that that they've either been ordered to support, or they know if they don't support, then they're going to have some consequences. So yeah, man, I personally don't pay attention to any of the nonsense, because I pay attention to actions.
Yeah.
And the action showed me is if you do things on our side and on our behalf, then it doesn't matter if they're criminal or not. We're going to get you off on this, and that's what happened with the insurrection.
Yeah.
So in this case, with the shooting in Minneapolis, I just hope that the individuals that are investigating this are sticking to their oath and they're doing things the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Chief, is there anything else that you like to add to this conversation before we end tonight's podcast?
No, I mean, man, we've said a lot, and I mean, if I would say anything, I would just ask that people don't lose their humanity in the environment that we find ourselves in. It is so divisive, and daily, I see people going back and forth or going at each other, where just a few days ago, they were friends.
Yeah.
And now something has happened, and the issue has happened, and we're losing our decency and humanity with one another. That now, just because you think differently than I do on this issue, now you're a mortal enemy, of mine. And so I would just, encourage people to don't lose sight of what they know to be true to them.
Yeah.
And the people, the people that are in their lives and in their circles, we're not always going to agree on things. We're not always going to have the same views on things, but that doesn't mean that we have to be enemies with one another as a result of it. And we can have, a discourse about things that doesn't have to be so nasty and just so mean towards one another. That's the main thing. We're all impacted by these things, and we need to remember that when we talk and engage with one another.
Yeah. Well, and another thing I'd like to just touch on real quick is the fact that Chief O'Hara has done a lot in the probably almost going on 4 years he's been here to rebuild the Minneapolis Police Department, rebuild the trust in the community, because there's still a lot of trust has gotten better. And since I've been up here, and he and I, we had some conversations about it. But even though this didn't involve a Minneapolis police officer, there's people who still have that feeling that we're all the same, even though we're in different color uniforms, but you're still the police. And so I think, this is going to, with all the work that they've done, the mayor and him and other community leaders, the city council, this is going to put a strain on that partnership with this community in Minneapolis. And, it's starting to spread out to suburb cities. So it's going to be a while before things will get back, if there's a way of getting back to things being normal, Chief. So it's going to be.
And I was on CNN the next day after this incident happened, and that was the exact point that I raised in that interview. is, Chief O'Hare in that department. And I know Chief O'Hare, he's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
That they're really going to have to pull on the work that they've been doing since 2020.
Yeah.
And the relationships that they've built and the trust that they've built up in that community to try to keep that community together right now.
Yeah.
Because MPD didn't have anything to do with this incident.
Exactly.
But they're going to be the ones that are on the front lines having to manage and navigate it because it's their community. And they have to answer that call.
Yeah.
And it's, it's unfortunate what happened. It's tragic what happened. And there's a lot of things that are going to be impacted severely as a result of it. And I just honestly, man, I'm praying for the community up there.
Yeah.
And that was the text that I sent to Chief O'Hare that night.
Yeah.
Hey, man, I'm praying for you and your community, man, as you try to navigate this, because it is extremely difficult to navigate.
It is. And again, when ICE leaves, whenever that happens, is still a community still trying to heal from trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the tough part.
Yeah. Well, hey, Chief, I definitely, again, want to thank you for taking the time to come out and talk with me on You and the Law podcast, as we talked about the thin blue rift in Minneapolis after the tragic killing of that took place last Wednesday. So if you missed any parts of this podcast, you can definitely check out the rebroadcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasting at, and on our YouTube channel, You and the Law podcast. So again, Chief, hang tight. Let me do the outro, and I want to get back with you real quick. But again, thank you for tuning in tonight, and make sure you tune in this coming Thursday. I'll be having my guest back on the podcast, Reggie Gidding, who is the author of a book called Drama Behind the Badge. He's going to be the guest coming up on this Thursday's podcast episode. So make sure you tune in for that podcast this coming Thursday. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in tonight, and we will see you again this coming Thursday on You and the Law podcast.
That's a wrap on this episode of You and the Law podcast. We've got more eye-opening conversations and hard-hitting insights coming your way, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and stay ready, because the next episode might just change the way you see law enforcement forever.